include the wise men. And we talk a lot about the wise men and sing about them. There's been movies made about them. But it's odd that we really don't know a whole lot about them. There's a lot of conjecture about them. Most of what we think we know about them comes to us from traditions or from the movies or those kinds of things. Things that people have just come out and said or created, or storylines that have been created for them. And so what is it that we can really know about them? And so hopefully we're going to be able to shed some light on that as we walk through this, as we talk about the glory of Christmas. So there in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, now, and as Mark has read, it says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem. So we are now introduced to these Magi, and it's funny because this is really not the first time that we have seen the Magi, even in the Bible. The Magi really come about, the first that we know about them anyway, it was almost like a class of people. The Magi came to us way back in the 7th century BC. And there are people who say that they are, descendants of the 3 sons of Noah, meaning that one was an Ethiopian, which is why if you ever look at a nativity scene, I guess ours is one single color, but if you ever seen any that have different colors to them, you'll see that 2 of them are white or Middle Eastern and one of them is black. And it's because they believe that they are from the 3 sons of Noah, one being an Ethiopian. And so that is how they are portrayed. And so again, when you see those nativity scenes like that, they are telling you a story that they believe to be true, but we don't really know to be true. Because really these, we just got finished singing a few moments ago, We 3 Kings of Orient are, and they weren't kings. We don't really know a whole lot, but we do know that this is a class of people that came from the 7th century BC. They were from a tribe out of Mesopotamia. And these were, at least they began, as the priests of this tribe. But as the priests, they were also involved in a lot of different things, most of them very educational, so that they became experts in just about every educational field that you can think of. They were into astronomy. They were into astrology. We'll get back to that in a little bit. But actually, back then, astronomy and astrology were very much interconnected. They were into the occult. They were into sorcery. They read dreams, Daniel chapter 2, which is where we first hear about them. They were a part of a sacrificial system. They were into science, agriculture, math, history, everything that you can think of. This is what they did. This is what they knew. So they were leading in their field, in the educational system. They were leading religiously. They were even leading politically. Because the political kings who came out of Persia, they were mostly okayed by this class of Magi. That's who they were. The thing about them is, it's very interesting that unlike most of the people around them, they were monotheistic. Now, if you're not sure what that is, theism, study of God, mono meaning one. We are monotheists because we believe in one God. Not polytheism, which is a belief in many gods, which is what most cultures believed in their day. So they were really kind of outside the norm in that respect. And so they actually had something in common with the Jew. Now, that becomes important because when you get to the story in Daniel chapter 2, if you don't remember the story in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, we've talked about it in here several times, but in case you weren't in here for that, in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, he has a dream. And he says, I need you to tell me what this dream. He went to all of his magi, he went to all of his wise men, is what they're called. He went to them and he said, I need you to tell me what the dream was and what the dream meant. And so Daniel, of course, how he gets his fame in the area, Daniel becomes the one who can tell him what the riddle is. He can tell him what the dream was and what the dream meant. Now, if you remember in that story, Nebuchadnezzar said, if you can't do this for me, I'm going to kill all of y'all. Every last one of you I'm going to kill. Well, when Daniel figures out, when God reveals to him what the dream was and what the dream meant, he goes to the king and he says, listen, don't kill these guys. I've got you covered. I want you to spare the lives of these wise men. Same class of people that we are now introduced to here in Matthew chapter 2. And that's not where their story ends either. We also read about a magician in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 8, I believe it is. We read about him. His name is Simon, and he just happens to be a shyster. But he is one who is able to tell dreams. He is a bad apple out of a good group. All of these people are interconnected. So it's not like the Magi are just like out of nowhere and they disappear and we never see them again. No, we find them in the scriptures and we find them in history. In fact, Esther refers to them as well. So when Daniel stands up for them, Daniel gains their respect. Daniel, and again, we're going back way back in the Old Testament, about 500 years before Jesus. He gains their respect, but he also begins to be influential among them so that they begin to study him and his religion. That's very important because then they kind of go off the scene, right? They go out for 100 years. We don't really hear anything about them, at least as far as the Bible is concerned. But then the question comes up, why is it that they are able to connect with what's going on? They see this thing that we're going to talk about in the sky, and they begin to follow this Messiah that is not, he didn't even come for them, he came for the Jews. Why is it that they come out of nowhere and they are in tune with what God is doing and God's own people aren't? It's because they have been studying. They have cared because of the influence of Daniel hundreds of years earlier. So these are the wise men that we are now seeing again here in Matthew chapter 2. And they are going to come and they're going to seek out in the days of Herod. And here's the cool thing about Matthew chapter 2 now. Here's how Matthew, it's one of those grammatical things that he has constructed purposefully that if we don't really kind of dig in there, we may miss out on this. But I think it's almost humorous what Matthew does here, because he says that these guys, they come in the days of Herod the king. At least that's how our Bible translates it. The literal translation of this, in the grammatical translation of this would be that they came in the King Herod days. Now that's very important, and here's why. Because it's not like Herod was legitimately the king. It was simply his title. And they come recognizing that they are looking for the King of the Jews. And not just any King of the Jews, he was born for this. From birth, he is the legitimate King of the Jews. Now Herod was half Jewish and he was half Edomite, neighbors. And he took on Judaism. He said, I will be a Jew so that I can lord over the Jews. And these kings, and along with Matthew and his recollection of it all, he is recognizing that Herod is not the legitimate king. Jesus is the legitimate king, which makes all the difference in the world, because how was Jesus born? He was born with his legitimacy in question by everyone, including Joseph, because Joseph wanted to put his wife aside because he just assumed that she was having an illegitimate child. And now Matthew is standing up and saying, oh no, not only is he a legitimate child, he is the legitimate king of the Jews. Herod is a usurper. He is there to take something that is not his. And so Herod, he grew up, he has always been one who is very protective of his throne. He was always worried that somebody was going to come and take that throne. He killed wives. He killed his own sons. He killed his in-laws. He killed all kind of people, anybody that he thought would take his throne. That's what plays into, in a few moments, we see that he's now going to go and kill a bunch of babies so that he can hold on to his throne. So, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. So, point number one, if you're there, you're taking notes. the top, whatever you wanted to write down about the Magi, that's up to you. Blank number 1. If you want to discover or rediscover the glory of Christmas, the first thing you must do is sacrifice for it. You must sacrifice for it. You're not going to, if you want to really, and again, when I talk about experience the glory of Christmas, I'm not just talking about the warm fuzzies, okay? I'm not talking about reimagining and feeling again what you felt once when you were a little kid or whatever. I'm not saying anything wrong with that. I love the warm fuzzies of Christmas. I love all that kind of stuff. But if you really want to discover the glory of Christmas, what Christmas is really all about and how it can touch and change your life both now and for all eternity, the first thing you have to do is sacrifice for it. Man, you can't just sit back and do what you have always done. You know the saying, you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. No, if you want to experience the glory of Christmas, you're going to have to sacrifice. There are changes that are going to have to be made. And it may not be huge, large-scale changes. It might be. I don't really know. It might just be in how you schedule things. It might be in how you do what you do over the course of the next week or a couple of weeks even. We have to make sacrifices for this in order to see it. See, the wise men, they didn't just sit back where they were. The wise men were a people that they probably came out of Persia. When Herod became the king of this region, he drove out this class of people known as the Magi, and they migrated over to Persia. And so this is where they were coming from in that area, general area, Mesopotamia area, maybe in Babylon, whatever. But it wasn't as far east as, what we would call the Far East nowadays. It was probably in the Persia, Babylonian area. And so they didn't just sit back and say, hey, there's a light up in the sky. Yay, let's just pray about this. They didn't say that. Don't you think if that was, we believe in prayer, don't you think they could have just said, hey, God, welcome to the earth. We're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're carrying through with this messianic message and this plan that you've put in place from long ago. We're so excited that you're doing this. No, they took up from their very influential lives. They left their ivory towers where they had all the influence. They had all the comforts of home and not just the familiarity with home. We're talking about they were the upper echelon of society, so they had really all the comforts that you can imagine in that day. They left all of that to go on days and days' journey to seek this out. There has to be something within us that says, I will give up something so that I can experience the glory of Christmas. There has to be the willingness to do that and to move forward. So you have to sacrifice for it. That's number one, if you want to experience the glory of Christmas. So we see there, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now, if he was a Jew who was really seeking after God, and he heard that the Messiah was there, he would have been elated. But he was really more concerned about him keeping his power and his comfort and his leadership role and all that came along with that. And it says that all Jerusalem with him. Now, that's probably not every single individual, not every single Jew that was in Jerusalem. Because really, when these wise men came in, it says, in fact, it says when they came arrived in Jerusalem, saying, that means it's a continual action. So they were just kind of coming over here, and they'd be like, hey, where's this king of the Jews? Where's the king? And they'd come over here. Where's the king of the Jews? They'd come to this section of town. Where's the king of the Jews? And so on and so forth. They were just asking around is what they were doing. And so it's probably here, if they were going to people that they thought would know who and where this Messiah was, they were probably a little bit surprised that not everybody knew, so they ended up in front of the leadership. And it was probably these people who had gotten power the same way and at the same time that Herod did. And so, of course, they're troubled because now there is going to be a threat to the throne and the upheaval of the political system that they had installed. So they gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people, and Herod asked them where the Messiah was to be born. He was just kind of a fraud, you know. He was a Jew in name only, or maybe in birth only, but he didn't really care about the Jewish system or the Jewish belief system or the scriptures. He didn't care about any of that. So he had to go, and it was kind of exposed now for being a fraud. But he said, where is this Messiah to be born? And they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea. This is what was written by the prophet. And they quote Micah, showing that they were right, that he would be born in Bethlehem. The next thing that you need to and I need to do if we want to experience or re-experience the glory of Christmas is we need to pursue it. We need to pursue it. You see, getting out of their comfort zone for them meant leaving town, meant going on a search for it. May or may not be the case for you and for me. I mean, with the internet, those kind of things, we may not need to leave town, go very far. We can still do a search. But I want you to see the contrast between the wise men and the scribes. The scribes and the chief priests. Those were the lead pastors of the church, the senior pastors, the preaching pastors of the church. They let the outsiders do the work. Oh, they had the Bible memorized. They knew. They could answer the questions. They were probably pretty good at Old Testament Jeopardy, right? But they didn't do anything about what they knew. They didn't do anything about what they heard. They just kind of laid back and let it come to them. And once they were finished with their part, we don't hear anything more about them until Jesus becomes an adult. It really didn't matter to them. They became apathetic to what was in front of them. But here we have the wise men who are willing to pursue, to ask the questions, to seek out the knowledge, to really look for and long for the Messiah. So the question that really you should ask yourself is how far are you willing to go? What are you willing to do to discover the glory of Christmas? Are you willing to take time out of what is going to be, at least for most people that I know, a busy week, a busy season? You've got your plans, you've got your traditions. Are you willing to put any of those aside so that you can just spend time in His Word? So that you can just spend some time meditating? How much time do we spend really meditating and thinking through the things that we read? Those are what we do when we pursue something, when we really go after it. We spend time thinking about it and talking about it and researching it. Will you take time and really spend time with Him? Pursue it, just like they did. So, we get to verse 7. Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and when you have found him, report to me, so that I may too come and worship him." And of course we know, as this story unfolds, if you're familiar with the story, it was a bold-faced lie. He had no interest in worshiping him at all. After hearing the king, they went their way, and the star which they had seen in the east went on before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. The star. You thought about the star before? Star is another one of those things that has caused a great deal of speculation. What was the star? Was it a regular star? We look out, we go out and we were just talking about it last night as we were riding around in the dark. Look up, and the stars were magnificent, and there are so many of them. And I remember one of my favorite things to do when I fell in love with the sky was when I was in college, and we were at Georgia Southern just an hour down the road, and we would actually come to Tybee Island, and we would come at night. We'd do a midnight beach run, which is exactly like what it sounds, midnight. We would leave the school. We would come over here, and we'd just stay out on the beach all night. And I remember walking out on cool nights, and you look up, and there would just be thousands and thousands and thousands of stars, and it was just so brilliant. And at that moment, I just fell in love with the sky. And so, was it one of those stars that you see up there and just somehow it got extra bright? Maybe it was an implosion at that time and it shed light on the baby Jesus. There are some people who believe that it was either Jupiter, or it possibly could have been Jupiter and Saturn that were perfectly aligned. But really, to me, that doesn't make any sense, because it's not really over any one particular place, right? It wouldn't guide them to a specific location. If you look up in the sky and you know what you're looking at, maybe you have one of those apps and it tells you, well, this is this particular star, it's this particular planet. If you find that and you locate it, that's fine, that's great. You can spend 30 minutes and you can walk down the road, and you can go drive an hour down the road, and it's still going to be pretty much in the same place. It doesn't really move or shed light on one particular area. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What was the star? And while we can't know for sure, I think that there is something that we should really consider. There are a couple of things that we read about in the Bible that when God is there, things light up. For instance, if you remember the story of the shepherds, which is not in Matthew, it's in Luke, the story of the shepherds, when the angels show up, there is brightness. There is, when Jesus confronts Paul, it's blinding him. When Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration and his glory is being shown, his face, the Bible says, is lit up. He is lit up. It is what fancy Bible people, okay? We won't get into it too much right now, but it's what fancy Bible people call the Shekinah glory of God. It's where God in all of his brilliance visibly brightens. That's the only thing that really would make sense in this story, because they're following from their homeland. They get to Jerusalem, and all of a sudden they can't see it anymore. Where is this guy? And when they start looking for him again, then it shows up again. The Shekinah glory of God. Something that says this is a new moment. There is something transparent. There is something that is transcending, that is happening right now, right here in this place. The Son of God, God become flesh, God incarnate, born here. And so they now have followed this star. They now show up in front of Jesus. And it says here, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshiped him. Verse 12, last part of verse 11, then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. You want to experience the glory of Christmas? Third thing that we need to do is to prepare for it. They didn't come empty-handed. They left home knowing, believing that they were going to encounter the Messiah, and they were prepared to give gifts to him. And not just any gifts. Not just any gifts. There was this expectation, and the expectation was to come and to present the Christ child with these gifts. And they gave him gold and frankincense and myrrh. Now, 2 years ago, we preached in here, actually it was Christmas Eve, we talked about the wise men then. And I don't expect you to have remembered that 2 years ago. So I want to explain just very quickly what those gifts were. The first, of course, was gold. Gold is, as always, and I guess will always be, a precious, precious substance from the earth. And it was a symbol of wealth, it was a symbol of value, and it represented the royalty of Jesus Christ, King of kings and Lord of lords. They also gave him frankincense. Frankincense was a fragrant perfume. It's an incense that is used in worship and on very, very special occasions. The early church father, Origen, one of the great leaders of the early church, his name was Origen, and he called it the incense of deity. It was reserved for deity. It recognized Jesus as God, God come in the flesh. And then myrrh. Myrrh was a burial perfume. It was a fragrant perfume. It was a gift for a mortal. And it foresaw the death of Jesus. It referred to his humanity. These were perfectly appropriate gifts, not just because they were bringing, something they got at the office party and they were going to re-gift the next day. They brought precious things that revealed who Jesus is. They were prepared. In one of our great Christmas songs, we say, "Let every heart prepare him room." So if you really want to capture the essence of Christmas and the glory of Christmas, let me just ask you, what are you planning to do for him this week? What is the plan? You're going to get together with family and eat a lot and watch some football and all that kind of stuff. I mean, nothing wrong with any of that stuff. I mean, I like everything I just said. I love every bit of that. But what about Jesus? What have you prepared for him? And I've heard people talk about, we're going to buy gifts for Jesus. I'm not really sure how that works. I mean, like, if I go to Walmart and buy him something, how am I going to give it to him? I'm not really sure about that part. I've heard about people making birthday cakes, and that's cool. Kind of puts the focus back where the focus should be. But really, what are you going to do for him? What are you going to say to him? How are you going to act on his behalf in this world? What will you do for your neighbor that highlights who Jesus is and what Jesus would do in their lives if he was here? Those are the things that we should be asking ourselves. We should prepare for that. Because in Jeremiah chapter 29, God said, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." We need to prepare for it. And then there's a fourth thing that I would have you write down. It's not there in your outline. I was actually going to put this in another part of the message, but honestly, as I was in here with you, worshiping with you, I really just wanted to make this its own thing. So I want you to write down a fourth thing there. If you want to rediscover the glory of Christmas, you need to focus on him. Like really focus on Jesus. And I don't mean that flippantly. You had these men, and we don't know that there were three. Three is the number that we come up with, again, because were they representing the sons of Noah, the three sons of Noah? Probably not. There are three gifts, those kinds of things. In fact, I read an article, I started an article, I didn't finish it, so I don't know how well versed it is, but it said there were many wise men that showed up. We don't know. We just don't know. And just like the video captured some of the essence of the wise men and not others, this scene here, which I love, I've told y'all before, I love nativity scenes. It doesn't really capture what really happened when Jesus was born. Because we see that here, we just got finished reading, when the wise men showed up, Jesus was in a house. Mary and Joseph and Jesus were in a house. And based upon the other information that we have from that story, the 2 years and younger, the kids who were killed and all that, we just believe that it was somewhere around 2 years later when the wise men showed up. So the wise men weren't here when he was in a manger, and wise men in the shepherds weren't here at the same time or any of that kind of stuff. So on one hand, this is all wrong. But the spirit of it is not. You had these men who showed up, and they were the upper echelon of society. They were well respected. I mean, they were E.F. Hutton. Whenever they spoke, people listened. They had everything. They had all the comforts of life. They had good minds. They were smart. They were powerful. They had everything. And then I look down, and they are bowing. That's not their usual posture. My guess is they were used to people coming and bowing before them. Not to worship them necessarily, not because they were kings, but simply because they were that well respected. And here they come and bend the knee. And they recognize they are not what this is about. This is about a baby in a manger who would grow up to one day be the deliverer for God's people, the one who would set them free, the Messiah for the Jew, the Savior for the world, the only hope for you and for me. I think that if we were to consider Jesus like that, and we were to recognize that Jesus is God come in the flesh, and just how complex of an individual he is, and how much glory he has as he's up on his heavenly throne right now, I think that we could all come to a consensus that he deserves the attention that we would give. And I think everything that they've done up to this point, you know, the sacrificing that we've talked about, and the pursuing, and the preparation, I think all of that, I think those are things are necessary, or else I wouldn't have talked about them today. But I think all of that would have come up empty. It would all have been, I don't know about a waste of time, but it would have really fallen vastly short if when they got here, they didn't take time to worship, to focus on Christ. And so I think we can do those other things too, and we can talk about them, and they sound cool and nice and everything. But if you don't take time and really focus on Jesus this Christmas, it will be lost. Again, a waste, I don't really want to say that. But you won't discover the true glory of Christmas. You might get the goosebumps, you might go through the fun stuff, continue on those traditions, but you'll miss out on the glory of Christmas. Let me close by saying this. You can say, well, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not really a member of this church. I'm not really a member of any church. Okay. I'm not really super spiritual, I don't know everything. I don't know all the stuff about the Bible, and I don't really have experience in prayer, and I'm really kind of intimidated even coming to church at times and those kinds of things. I'm not sure if I don't know if I really fit in this category that you're talking about. Well, let me remind you of who we're talking about. Let me remind you of these guys right down here. These guys down here, however many there were, they were probably one of their main things was astrology. Now, that's not really a bad word today because people are so, they're either into it or they play around with it and think it's fun. Let me just tell you, the Old Testament said if you find somebody who's doing that kind of stuff, kill them. That's how he felt about it. It is condemned by God. Astrology condemned by God. And yet, these are the ones that God revealed himself to. You can't give me a reason. You can't tell me that you're outside of the scope of God's reach. If you want to experience the glory of Christmas, guess what? There is a God who wants you to and is reaching out to you right now. And he is calling out to you, and he is inviting you. Come and experience. You won't get it anywhere else. This just was God's plan. This was just God. This was the pattern that God had, because God also reached out to the shepherds, like the low class, stinky, nobody wants to be around, gross, uneducated, nobody, unpopular group like shepherds. That just seems to be how God works. Because his own people, no thank you. We got our religion just like we like it. Don't be that. Don't be that. It's not about being religious. It's not about looking good. It's not about how smart you are, how much you know, how if you can pray out loud, if you can sing. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about a heart that is open that says, I want to experience, I just feel like I've done everything. I feel like I can go through all those motions again, and I'll just feel empty on the inside. If you finally reached that point, God says, I'll meet you. I will meet you there. Just sacrifice for it. Pursue it. Prepare for it like you expect it. And focus on him. And wherever you are this Christmas, happy, sad, somewhere in the middle, and there's a lot of middle ground there, wherever you are, God will meet you there. And you will have the glory of Christmas. God, we thank you that we don't have to fit some certain mold before you'll give us any attention. We just have to be willing, have to have an open heart, sense your calling, and respond to it. So God, have your way in our lives, not just in the next few minutes, not just today because it's Sunday, but have your way in our lives moving forward. And we thank you for this Christmas season that reminds us, that helps kind of point us back to you, possibly in a way that no other time of the year can. So have your own way in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. If you have any questions, any spiritual needs, then please don't hesitate to reach out. You can see me before you leave this room, or you can use the QR code that's on the screen if you're watching from home or online some way. Then that QR code will work for you just like it does anybody who is in this room, and it'll just begin a conversation that I would be honored to have with you about anything spiritual going on in your lives. Mark?
There is a king seated among us. Let every heart receive him now. Where there is praise, he will inhabit. There will be grace.